welcome everybody. Part 3 of our 8-part webinar series on AVD, and as the title says, there's a discussion, so please interrupt, put your hand up, ask a question at any point. We really do want to have a discussion. That was some feedback that we got from previous webinars, and we were keen to make sure we do that. Also, I'd like to obviously welcome our friends from NetApp today. So we've got Cecilia and Tarun will be helping George with some demos later on and talking about the tech in a bit more depth. And of course, I should make sure that I warn you all that the session is recorded, which has been requested. I know we've got a few apologies and things as well. So we're recording each of these sessions, and you can watch back the recordings at any time. Right? So all our team will make sure that they're passed around and out to the people that couldn't make it. So I'll do Paul Heaton, I'm the CEO and co-founder of CubeSys. I'll be doing a short introduction here, and then we have George and Jerome doing the mainstay of the work and getting into some of the technical depth with Azure NetApp Files and why that's important, and how important storage is to AVD and the VDI solution that we've been working on so much in the last 2 years. So for those of you that don't know, CubeSys have now completed over 40 projects in AVD across a range of clients, from large government agencies to some rather bespoke and unique use cases. And along that journey, and as you're about to find out today, I think it's really important that we understand the storage capabilities of Azure Files, and most importantly NetApp Files, because when we talk about the IOPS and the logon storms in the morning, as George and Trum will be doing later, it's very important that we have that part of the solution right, so that we get the best performance for you and your user base. So we'll walk you through all that, and then we'll finalize with some best practice tips for you later on. And of course, we do have, and we'll send out some information, an offer around doing an assessment for AVD. If you're interested in that, please reach out to us afterwards. But with that, I think I'll pass over to George and Tarun. Right? So George, you're going to kick us off?
Yeah, mate. Cheers. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, guys.
Cool. Hey, guys. My name's George Zerkowski. I'm one of the senior cloud consultants here at CubeSys. Pretty much been across all of the AVD projects that Paul mentioned here at CubeSys, and really familiar with Azure Virtual Desktop, VMware Horizon, Citrix, all of those sort of remote VDI, remote app solutions. So I've got about 12 years background around that, and SCCM, SOE, building, that kind of thing. So I'm pretty familiar with all of the concept. Cool, so I'll run you through the presentation. Start with a bit of an introduction around what storage requirements are needed for AVD. So when we're talking about Azure Virtual Desktop, our virtual machines are traditionally living in the cloud. So storage is an important part of AVD. It's basically where all of your user profiles sit, and where any of your sort of MSIX app attached packages sit as well, if it's something that you're using. It's important because we access this storage directly. So the servers themselves, when we're using FSLogix profiles, will map directly to the storage account, and that's where it's read and writes directly to this storage, and then we use the term IOPS to better understand how fast this storage is. So the end result is we have a virtual machine that's running in Azure. We have one of these 3 solutions here, whether it's Azure Files, Azure NetApp Files, or a traditional file server living in the cloud. And then when a user logs in, the storage is mounted directly to the session host from whatever storage solution you're using. Azure Files is sort of your cloud native, instance that you can spin up. You can domain join it. You can use, hybrid cloud, that kind of thing. Azure NetApp Files, again, is cloud native. It's basically available in the Azure portal today. It's not a third-party product from the marketplace. It's an actual offering from Microsoft. So you can log support tickets for ANF directly in the Azure portal, just like you would with any other services. ANF as well as Azure Files are both consumption-based models, so you pay for what you use. And the great thing about Azure NetApp Files is it's actually a lot easier to set up than Azure Files when you're doing, domain join stuff. So typically with AVD, a lot of people are hybrid, so you would be domain joining those AVD session hosts to your on-prem domain controllers. So, it's real easy to set up. It's all done via the wizard. Azure Files, you traditionally need to go through and, set up the AZ Files hybrid PowerShell scripts and do all this other sort of stuff in the background, whereas ANF makes that really easy. The other option there is obviously a traditional file server, like a DFS share or something like that. So you can use that as well. But the main benefit of Azure NetApp Files and Azure Files is the fast and native storage that it offers. Azure NetApp Files is the only one that offers sub-millisecond latency. So you get bare metal performance when using Azure NetApp Files. Again, it's very simple to set up. You can set it up in minutes and manage it seamlessly using the portal, PowerShell, APIs, that kind of stuff. It also supports multiple file storage protocols, so things like NFS and SMB, all of the latest. It pretty much supports all of that stuff. And then you've got things like data protection, which is, it's does snapshots, backups. You can also do cross-region replication, which I'll get into a little bit later on. So focusing around Azure NetApp Files, traditionally this is a sort of typical deployment. You've got your Azure subscription at the top. You will enable Azure NetApp Files for that subscription. So it's generally a resource provider that you turn on. Then you deploy a Azure NetApp Files account based on the region that you'd like to deploy into. Then you've got that blue box there, which is basically a capacity pool. Now, these capacity pools have to be a minimum of 4 terabytes. That's sort of the minimum for ANF. And then of that 4 terabytes, or 5 in this case, you can deploy however many volumes you like. So they can be NFS volumes, SMB volumes, both, whatever you want, right? Once that's been set up, that is then passed through to the host pools or the VMs themselves. So those storage accounts or those volumes would be domain joined. They would come up as a UNC share. You would use FS Logics to publish that to your session host VMs, and then when users log in, the VM or the VHDX is dynamically attached to whatever VM they log into, and then the read writes happen on the storage account directly and not on the local session host. If you're using things like Cloud Cache and that, yes, you can sort of offload that onto the local machine and then have the writes copied up to the server later. But typically, in a traditional deployment, you do the read writes on the storage itself. Azure NetApp Files offers 3 tiers that you can select. So you've got Ultra, Premium, and Standard. Now, depending on how big your environment is and how many users are logging in at any given moment, for example, Ultra provides up to 128 megabytes of throughput per 1 terabyte of capacity. So again, the minimum is 4 terabytes that you can provision. So if you do 128 times 4 terabytes, you're looking at about 512 megabytes read write per second. And then for premium, it's 256, and then for standard, it's 64. So depending on how big your environment is, you can scale up as required. When you set up Azure NetApp Files and you deploy it, it wants to deploy a Azure NetApp's subnet, because the storage itself is actually registered inside your VNet. You access it via VNet. It's not externally accessible, so you need to delegate a subnet to Azure NetApp Files. On top of that, you also need to domain join that Azure NetApp Files to your Active Directory, and then set up your capacity pool, your volume, and then finally go in and set up your NTFS permissions. So, have your users be able to create their own profiles with their modified permissions, things like that. The other thing as well that I want to mention is it supports snapshots natively. You can do volume backups and the cross-region stuff. We've got a use case to talk about a little bit later around cross-region replication, but that's basically where you're replicating your shares into another Azure region. Some of the benefits of NetApp. So again, it's native Azure service. You can log your support tickets directly through the Microsoft portal. It's single shared platform for FS Logics containers and generic file shares, and you can also use it for app attach if you like. It's a lower TCO, so it's a PaaS service. There's no VMs that are required, and it's got that integrated snapshot and backup all within the portal, and it's really, really easy to use. When I originally started jumping on board with AVD, we were deploying a lot of Azure file shares, and once I got my hands on Azure NetApp Files and realized how simple it was to deploy, I just loved the solution straight away. So moving forward, any sort of production workloads that we do, we generally recommend Azure NetApp Files. It's got high IOPS, so again, sub-millisecond latency. Depending on what storage tier you choose, or how fast or how many users you have in your environment, you can sort of scale that based on that. And as you go up in storage sizes, the actual performance increases as well. So remember before I mentioned, 128 times 4 terabytes, because that's the minimum that you provision. If you were to provision bigger capacity pools, you would obviously get more IOPS and more throughput with that. It's scalable for both capacity and performance. So if you do find at one point that you need to scale up or scale down, you can increase the size of the share, the capacity pool as well as the share. So you can do that, and then you can also spin up additional like ultra performance tiers if you need to go that really quick for like applications like SAP or something like that, if you're running anything there, but we'll just focus mainly on AVD. Compatibility wise, it does SMB all versions, it's got Active Directory support, and it does NTFS support. So when you spin up an account and you domain join it, you will get by default, everyone will be a sort of an admin on the box until you go in and set up the NTFS file permissions and sort of restrict it down to whatever AD groups you want to push it to. When deploying ANF in AVD, and you've got less than 1,000 servers, this is typically what a deployment looks like. Now, one thing I want to highlight here is the number of IPs in a VNet that you can have accessing any of the ANF volumes. At the moment is limited to 1,000 for basic network features. Tarun's going to get into some more other features around standard network features, which it removes this limitation, and it sort of uses Azure limits and defaults in that regard. But for the time being, in Australia East anyway, we're limited to 1,000 IPs for the time being. And this is typically that deployment you would have. So you'd have a single ANF storage account deployed with multiple volumes, and that ANF subnet there will basically be tied in with all of your session host subnets to be able to talk to the backend storage. If you're going more than 1,000 hosts, right, you would need to deploy separate ANF subnets and separate ANF containers to be able to map more than 1,000 hosts per capacity pool or share or volume, whatever you're deploying. So if you have a really, really large environment, that's something that you need to consider before deploying anything. When it comes to some of the key functionality here, as you can see, Azure NetApp Files has got 9 nines SLA. Azure Files Premium has got 3, and Azure Files has got 3. But the main difference between Azure Files and Azure Files Premium is Azure Files Premium actually gives you more features around how much IOPS and throughput and things like that you can have. Some of the differences are listed there. Azure NetApp Files just pretty much takes the best of both worlds and more, and you can see on the left hand column there that it supports NFS, SMB 3.1. It does all the multi-channel stuff. It's actually integrated in your VNet. You can have up to 100 terabytes per volume. If you have large file sizes and you want to use it for something like that, you can see that there's 16 terabytes maximum file size in any volume. And I guess the most important one there, that the storage backend is all SSDs, right? Again, sub-millisecond latency. It is really, really fast. I mentioned cross-region replication before. So basically what this is it lets you synchronously replicate data from one ANF volume. So like you have a source volume in one region to another destination volume in another region. And it basically allows you to fail over your application if there is a region outage. It's all controlled via the Azure portal. You can obviously script it and whatnot, but just for simplicity terms, you can deploy a replication volume, have the primary sync to that. When you do fail over, the volume is read only until you fail over, and then you can sort of push your clients or your users to that secondary volume until the primary site comes back online, and then you need to manually replicate the volume yet again, and then finally fail over. So the volumes are always going to be in read only until you do the fail over part. The cross-region replication stuff doesn't support multiple subscriptions at this point, so everything needs to be in a single subscription. And then you can also select which volume you want to use for cross-region replication. So if you've got a couple of test file shares or something like that, you don't want to copy them across, you don't have to include them as part of your replication strategy. So why would we use cross-region replication if it's just for user profiles? Well, it really depends on what business, what the business wants to do, whether it's critical or not. Because at the end of the day, if we lose a user's profile and someone goes to log in, if the profile gets corrupt for whatever reason, I mean, generally we can typically delete it if we're using things like OneDrive sync and whatnot. So all of their data will resync to their machine. But I've got a really unique case at the moment where I've got a customer who deploys personal desktops in a region. And the reason why they have personal desktops is because there's an application that wants to map their computer name to a particular application. If that region was to go down, we would need to spin those VMs up in a secondary region and then yet again go ahead and map those usernames and host names to a particular application. So what we've done is we've actually deployed personal VMs with FSLogic storage profiles on a a primary storage account, and then we have that replicating over to the destination storage account, so that in the event of a failover, the VMs are ready, all the user data and everything, all their profiles are ready to go with minimum downtime. So that's one use case for that. But typically, when you do anything around personal VMs, you don't generally want to. I guess it's not really best practice to turn on FSLogic's profiles. I mean, the user's logging into a VM that's personal and persistent to them. So there's not really much of a use case for that, but it can be done. You can redirect the profile if needed for those types of workloads. Tarun, did you want to run through the demo real quick, please?
Sure. Thanks a lot, George. Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen and let me know when it's visible. Can you guys see it? Wonderful. So actually, George, thanks for a very comprehensive overview of ANF. You have made my job a lot easier. I can quickly showcase simply what you were just describing. So thanks for doing that. Well, as George clearly pointed out, this is a first-party service from Microsoft. Although the name suggests Azure NetApp Files, and often there is a confusion that this is something which you need to do with NetApp. No, not at all. This is a first-party service from Microsoft, and it's available. You can expect it to behave exactly like any other first-party service from Microsoft, like Azure Files or anything which you associate in Azure ecosystem. Now, what I have over here is something very basic, some of the things which George has already described for you. So what we are going to do, let me show you the end state we are going for, and then we'll build these things. So what I have is two capacity pools, and they have two volumes created. And as you can see, this is a configuration across Australia East and Australia Southeast. So two different Azure regions. So these two volumes are configured in a cross-region replication relationship. So the source volume is set up in Sydney, and I'm replicating this into the DR volume, which is there in Melbourne. So if I just go into my DR volume and show you what exactly I have over here. So this is something which is happening in the background. I've set up this environment, and this is this clearly indicates that this is a destination in this relationship. The replication status is healthy, and it is in a mirrored state. Under the hood, what it is doing is it is actually using a very robust NetApp technology called SnapMirror, which is basically coming to play, and it's picking up the SnapMirror replicas and keeping this in the DR region. So this is pretty much every 10 minutes, it picks up what is there on the source side and sends it across to the destination side. So that's how, if let's say your primary region goes down, you have this data available to you in the secondary region itself. So that's the whole CRR bit. That's the whole concept behind cross-region replication. So in case, let's say, if I come over here, what I can do, as you can see, the replication is there, and I can break this peering. As George was pointing out, this is in a replicated relationship. But if I break the peering, that point onwards, I can mount these volumes and I can start working with the data. So I just have to come over here, break the peering, and mount those volumes again back onto my hosts, and I'm good to go. Okay. Now let's take so we'll try and set this up. This is the end state I have shown you, and let's set it up how it would need to be done. Okay. So first thing first, the very first thing, if you remember the slide which George showed you about, you have the Azure subscription, then within that NetApp accounts, then your capacity pools and volume. So we'll just quickly show you how that needs to be set up, and we'll build on from top of that. So this is my resource group, and in this, if I just come out over here and I come to Azure NetApp Files, so this is how I actually set up a NetApp account. So let's say if I call it demo NetApp. This is a subscription, the resource group in which I'm creating this. And so NetApp account is nothing special. It is just simply the mapping of the Azure region I would be operating in. So I can choose Australia Southeast, or even in Australia, we can go for central to world. So whichever region, your Azure region you would be operating in, you set that up. So this is what I have already set up for you. So I'm not creating it again. I'll just show you the one which we are working with. So if we come over here, we have two of these already configured. One is called demo TA. So this is actually, if you would notice, this is something which is in Australia East region. And then I also have something called CubeSys DRSE, which is SE is the Southeast region I'm indicating. So this is in Australia Southeast. So I have two NetApp accounts created. And next step would be to go ahead and create the capacity pools in those, let's say, NetApp accounts. So I go to the one which is my source region, and if I go to the capacity pools over here, I have this capacity pool created over here. Okay, CubeSys demo, I call it, and this is the provision capacity. As we previously pointed out, the minimum starting point is 4 terabyte, and you have 3 service levels. So I can just show you that. So let's say I call it demo pool. I have these 3 service level. Standard, premium, ultra. So this is the different capacity levels which I can provision, and I can change this dynamically also. And this is the capacity which has been provisioned. So this is minimum, and I can add or remove as I want. QoS, let's say if I create a volume and I want to control the throughput within that volume based on the capacity which I had been provisioning, and I want to assign capacity to a specific volume, then I would go for manual QoS. But for most of the AVD scenarios, I would recommend going in with the auto QoS. Manual QoS comes into play where you have some sort of environment, like you have a workload like SAP, and there you want to fine tune performance of a certain volume, irrespective of the size. You want to dedicate higher throughput to a smaller volume, then you would go for something like this. So I'll just discard this, and I'll go back to the volumes where the capacity pools which I have already created. So CubeSys is over here, and I can always resize. So let's say I provision 5 terabyte. Now I want to provision 6 terabyte. Without any disruption, I'm just resizing this. So there is no service disruption when you do something like this. And again, I can change the service level also. So if I want to change this to standard to premium or to ultra, I can go ahead and do that as well. So without any service disruption. This is all software controlled, software throttled. So you don't have to worry about those elements, and you can change these things dynamically. Now within this, I have my volumes. So I provision, let's say I had about 6 terabyte capacity over here. Now I want to create another volume. Let me add a volume over here. I call it wall source, just to indicate that this is the source volume, and whatever capacity I want. So let's say I want to have 1 terabyte for this. This is the throughput which is coming in. This is the auto QoS. If we were using manual QoS, I could actually change these parameters separately for my environment. Okay, these enable cool access and stuff like that. Just ignore it for the time being. I'll explain this when I talk about the upcoming features part of it. And I just simply choose this. So the capacity which is there, and the delegated subnet. So all my ANF volumes are existing in a delegated subnet. So this is what George previously explained. When you set up ANF, you have to dedicate a subnet which will host all your ANF volumes. So this is already existing for me, so I don't have to create one. I'll use the existing ones. But if, let's say, you're doing it the first time, you specify the virtual network, and within that you can delegate a subnet. Could be something like a /26 IP range, which you can dedicate to be hosting all your ANF volume. Okay. And here we are going with the default settings, no changes over here. For simplicity, I'm showing NFS, but I can very well use SMB also. So NFS volume, and here is the choice of protocol, which version of protocol I want to go for. And I can also go for dual protocol volumes. That means the same volume is accessible by NFS as well as SMB protocols. Okay. Okay, moving forward, any kind of resource tagging you're using for internal billing purposes, you can specify those resource tag. And at this stage, it will perform a validation, and I can just go ahead and create the one. Okay. So any queries till this point before we move forward? So the objective is, what we are trying to do is we'll create this volume, and then we'll set up the CRR relationship. We'll go to the DR region. So this is the source region. So in AU East, I'm creating this volume. And once this volume is created, I'll go and replicate this volume in the DR region. So at this point, if there are any queries while this volume creation is taking place, I can take up those queries. Okay, no queries. That was fast. Let's go to the volume. So this is the volume which I just created. I come to the properties, and for my CRR process, I just need the resource ID. I simply copied the resource ID of this particular volume. Okay. Now let's go to the DR region. So this is my DR NetApp account, and in that I have a capacity pool. You can see this. This is CubeSys DR, which is created over here, and that I have an existing volume, but I want to add a replication to a new volume. I call it demo wall DR. So just to, there I said source, so let me call it target here. Okay. And what was the capacity we had on source? 1 terabyte. So I keep the same capacity on this end as well. And similarly, I also have a delegated subnet, and I'll be using basic networking. Standard networking is not available right now, so we'll work with the basic networking at this stage. You might have noticed there was an option for availability zone appearing when I was previously creating this in the source region, but not here. I'll elaborate on that a little later when we talk about the new upcoming features. Okay. Again, the choice of protocol, I still keep it default, which is NFS v3. Then I come to replication. So this is the different tab. So since I selected add replica, I just need to provide the volume of my source ID. That's why I copied this resource ID for my source volume. And I can control how frequently it gets replicated, hourly, daily, or if I want to replicate every 10 minutes, I set this to every 10 minutes. Again, I have the option to specify any resource tags. Performs a validation at this point. Validation passed. I just click on create. So now what it is doing, it is just setting up the relationship between the two volumes. So my source volume sits in Sydney, my DR volume sits in Melbourne, and this is how I'm setting up a cross-region replication relationship between these two regions across these two volumes using ANF cross-replication, region replication feature of ANF. Okay. Let's just give it a minute while this comes up. I'll have to perform one more step in the end once this volume comes up. Okay, that's wonderful. That's done. I come to the source volume. Sorry, this target volume. So demo wall target is the one which I just created. I copy this. This is the resource ID of my target volume. And now I have to go back to my source volume, which is, if you remember correctly, this is the volume which is my source volume. I come to this, and it will ask me to authorize the replication with the destination volume ID. That's why I just copied the destination volume ID. This is the resource ID of my destination volume. I come over here, and this is finally authorizing the replication between the two regions. Okay. Done. With that done, if I just come over here and I come to the replication stage, so you can see this. I've set up the CRR relationship. This is the source volume, so demo wall source. So this is my endpoint is source. If I go and check the properties of destination volume, it will show this as destination. And right now it is healthy state, but it is not in mirrored state. So it will take few minutes before it gets into that state. But this is the process which you need to follow to set up the CRR relationship between two volumes and have your both source and DR region primary and DR region working on ANF, and this provides you complete data protection. So as you can see, you can achieve very low level of RPO, RTO with this kind of solution. So if something goes down in your primary region, come to the secondary region or DR region, break the peering, and volumes are accessible to you. This is the mount path. So since it's an ANF volume, NFS volume, you have the mount path. You have to mount this in this fashion. But in case if it is an SMB volume you're working with, you would have / file name / path, which is appearing over there. So you can mount the volume simply by the drive letters, and you can do all those sort of things on your SMB volume. And you can, the process is the same. The CRR process, what we followed for an NFS volume, the same process is applicable. Only the choice of protocol is different, but the same process is followed for an SMB volume as well. Okay, typically in AVD kind of a deployment, you would use SMB volumes. I just use NFS over here because it's faster to do the demo with NFS, but the process is pretty much still the same. Okay, so I'll stop over here and give it a couple of minutes for you to discuss any queries you may have. And just to go back to my DR region, if you can go and see over here, we started with the DR demo wall, which was something which was created earlier, but while doing this demo, we just created this target one. And if I come to this, it is still in this state because it has not replicated. But this is how replication would occur. So if you see the previous ones which I had already set up, you would see the snap mirror relationship would exist like this. Every 10 minutes, it will be replicating the replica from primary region to the secondary region. And you do have the option, if let's say you're not using CRR, you want to use snapshots, you can always go and set up these snapshots as well. Using a snapshot policy, these snapshots can be taken. You can have up to 255 snapshots taken on a particular volume. Okay. Back to you, George.
Thanks, Tarun. Yeah, so as you can see, really, really simple stuff to install. It is like, just setting up the replication piece and the permissions and the whole GUI experience, really, really easy. That's why I love it. I prefer it better than Azure Files, to be honest. Real simple, and it gives you all those dashboards and graphs and things like that. I'll cover that a little bit later, but awesome work. All right, moving on. So some storage best practices. Firstly, whenever you're creating any AVD session host pools, you always want to have one share per host pool. So in this scenario here, we've got our, let's just say this is less than 1,000 IPs or less than 1,000 servers that are connecting to ANF. We have the single ANF subnet, and then we've got multiple capacity pools there. So this environment total would be less than 1,000 IPs, and each of those session hosts would write to their own volume that Tarun just demonstrated there. And you can have these volumes replicating to other regions. You can have snapshots, backup policies, that kind of stuff, all individual of each other. So you can choose what you want to back up, what you don't want to. Couple of other things. So best practice, exclude your AVD FS logic shares from any antivirus that's being scanned. So your VHDX files live on the ANF file storage share. You want to exclude anything that happens, when those shares are being mounted to the session host, just so that users don't get a poor logon performance or anything like that. You can still have your AV scanning it once it's mounted, but if there's anything going on as it's mounting it, good to just exclude that or that process from your AV. The next one is size and grow your storage for more IOPS. So as I mentioned before, you can scale up or scale down. Tarun just showed you how easy it is to go and basically change the size of a capacity pool and also change the size of a share. So if you need more IOPS, you're going to go back into lockdown, for example, you may as well ramp up the storage there. It takes a matter of minutes. It's really quick and easy to use, so you can do that so that your users don't get poor log on and log off performances. The other thing as well is obviously storage must be close to the workload. So if you know you're running your VMs in Australia East, build your storage in Australia East. Pretty simple. Another thing is consider DR failover backup, right? So how important are the profiles to your users? Are they actually storing any important data on their desktops and they don't have, OneDrive sync enabled or any other redirections or things like that? If you were to lose your profile share, what's going to happen to the users? Do you have any policies in there to say, well, if the share doesn't exist, don't allow our users to log in? If that's an option, then you need to consider looking at DR failover backup, because your users are going to be locked out. If they can't create a profile, then they're not going to be able to log into AVD. The other thing as well is a lot of customers miss this, and we'll have AVD running for a year. People come and go, leave the organization. They don't clean up their storage profiles. So you have a whole bunch of local profiles. It's really easy to just create a PowerShell script that says, check the last modified date of a particular VHDX file and delete it if it's more than 6 months. The user hasn't logged in since then, get rid of it. And then finally, the last one is use VHDX extension profiles rather than just VHD. The benefit of using VHDX is because it allows the profile to dynamically expand as needed. So by default, and this is an option that's set via group policy, you can set by default profiles are 30 gig, but you can set it via group policy to, say maximum profile size is 10 gigabytes before it starts growing. So it'll give you like white space, 10 gigabytes worth of, storage profile size there, and then it'll dynamically grow as needed. Talking about dynamically growing, you can also shrink user profiles from time to time. So there are a lot of people that, there might be like developers and things like that, use Visual Studio or something like that, where they have a lot of temp files, a lot of case stuff that goes to their profile. You can also shrink the profiles if you need to. So if you do like a, tree volume size and see that some user profiles are massive compared to other ones, you can shrink it and get rid of all that white space and bring the profile down. You can also resize it if you like. Something to look at that a lot of people don't do. The other one is remove old user profiles from your storage. So again, just making sure that there are no old or any backups. Like typically when help desk jump in and try and troubleshoot a scenario, or if they think it's a profile issue, they'll rename the profile. That way, if it's not the fix, then they can rename it back and then the user can sort of log back into that existing profile. But a lot of the time people just forget, to delete the old profile. So just something there to say, make sure you're removing it so that you're not clogging up your file shares. And then finally, when we're talking AVD, we're talking Windows. So typically SMB, enable SMB 3.1 encryption. Everything's going around this, like when we're talking cloud, everyone's so worried about security and things like that. So, tell your security guys, we can enable SMB 3.1. Only the AVD session host can talk to the storage because it's actually integrated into the VNet, that kind of stuff. So, they'll be happy when they hear those words, encryption, and it's only accessible via AVD. Moving forward, so monitoring. So you can, there's obviously built-in dashboards there where you can look at monitoring, your throughput of a particular volume. So this one here, I've just selected random volume. We can see that that's a total throughput. I think it was in the last 4 hours. Yep, in the top right, last 4 hours there. So you use metrics to monitor your volume storage, any IOPS, throughput, capacity limits, percentage of, storage use, that kind of stuff. And then if you find a dashboard that you like, or there's something, that you think might be good, you can use it to set up alerts. So for example, I have a lot of alerts set when the capacity is reaching, 90% of a particular volume, send me an email. I've got another one that says if the latency is higher than say 2 milliseconds, then send me a message to let me know that there's something wrong with the environment, because Azure NetApp Files is so fast. It's typically, under a millisecond latency. So if there's anything else going on there, we would know about it, and then we would need to go in and increase the share of the volume to get the the more throughput. And then finally, this is my favorite, set up dashboards for your storage. So this is just a couple of examples my colleague created for another customer. In Azure, you've got the dashboards option there. You can, import these into Grafana and all these other stuff, log analytics, whatever you want. But these are some of the cool dashboards that you can create. So you'd have, a time range period, say last 4 hours, and you can see actually what's going on in your environment. So this one here, there's not much going on. The right throughput there for this volume is 3 megabytes per second. But as you saw, earlier, you can go up to 512 megabytes a second with that ultra tier. So, you know, this is not even scraping the edge here. So this volume here is running pretty good. And then on the bottom right as well, you can see if you are in a cross-region replication, you've set up cross-region replication, you can see what's happening in the volume replication total transfer, so you can see if it's actually happening or not. Does anybody have any questions around anything that was discussed today, or wanted to ask any new questions?
No questions, George? Maybe you and Tyrone did such a good job.
Yeah, hopefully we did. Is anybody using Azure NetApp Files today? Like anyone from on the call? Has it been deployed in any of the environments out there in the world that we're not aware of?
I probably would just emphasize while we are thinking of your questions, guys, and please interrupt us. Can't emphasize enough how important having the right IOPS for a VDI solution. And it always has been the case when we're on-prem, wherever we be. IOPS is super important, particularly in the mornings when we get those log-on storms and things like that. So having the ability to use NetApp Files or sizing that storage at the back end has been super important to getting the right results for our clients, right? So when we've been doing these deployments, it's really important to make sure you get the storage options correct. And as you scale, that becomes more and more important, right? So if you're a large environment, then Azure NetApp Files is almost a must, right, for us to get the right performance for our clients, right?
Yeah.
Sort of what we've seen out in the field, right, George, through the projects. So.
Yeah. A lot of the stuff, like when it comes to IOPS and things like that, there's documents out there and there's Microsoft reference articles that say, you know, 10 IOPS is for a steady state when someone's logged in, 50 is for, or 50 per user is for when they're logging in and logging out, that kind of stuff, right? It's real hit and miss when you're trying to size and scale that for your environment. There's no one size fits all approach. You don't generally know if all your users are going to log in at 9 a.m., right? So you can't just say, oh, I'm going to, you know, size my volume as big as it can get and then, you know, reduce it later, that kind of thing. So with sizing and scaling the IOPS throughput, you basically need to deploy something as sort of a baseline and then go through, use those monitoring metrics to see if there's any latency or what the throughput is, or if there are any issues, if users are reporting slow logins, that kind of thing. So yes, although it is very important, it's also a bit of trial and error and a bit of, I guess, guessing what you sort of expect your users to be doing throughout the day.
I mean, that's an interesting point as well that we talk about in our assessments. We've got an upcoming webinar that will help you build your business case, and we'll go through some of the details and thinkings that we do when we put that economic assessment together. So it's a few, what's that, 6 weeks away, right? 14th of June, we'll build through how you get a business case together to convince your business that AVD is the right choice. And we do go into some of the storage options and how we might predict those, or at least have a good estimate of them. But George is right, once we get into the field and each business is unique and different in its requirements, and we do find ourselves tweaking those as we go live and making the match. And that's one of the beauties of I suppose, as a solution in the cloud like AVD and Azure NetApp Files, is that we can actually tweak that as we go, right? And in the past, when we were doing that on premise, that's almost impossible, right? We would be buying and procuring storage solutions way in advance, and getting more out of them was always difficult, right? So it's one of the key benefits, I suppose, is that elasticity and ability to change, as the boys have demonstrated today. Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Any more discussion points, guys, or any questions, observations?
Awesome. All right. Well,
again, don't worry about that. We will of course reach out. We have a recording of the session. I know there's a few people that said they would want you to come here today and couldn't, so we'll get that out to them. And if any questions occur to you afterwards, by all means, reach out to us. More than happy to help you answer those. Cool. Just before I sort of wrap up, George has got the slide up there for the upcoming sessions. Some really cool session next time on Nerdio and automation. So we'll teach you how to manage images and automate host pools and make use of that cloud elasticity. and then AppAttach and MSIX following that, which is another great technical in-depth session we'll have about how we can modernize the management of apps in a VDI solution. But before leaving today, just a really big thank you to our friends at NetApp Files, NetApp, so CC and Jerome especially, thank you for the effort today. Lovely to have you along and help us educate people on AVD and our best to put that in place.
Oh, thanks. It's a pleasure, and thanks for having us, Paul. Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Paul and George. Cheers.
Thanks everybody for attending, and we'll be in touch soon.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, George. Take care.